Like in Super Bowl 55, the Chiefs were humiliated. Mahomes was taking a beating for 3 hours, running for his life, making some insane throws against this vicious Buccaneers defense. After seeing Mahomes get hit 10 times, enduring 3 sacks and throwing 2 interceptions, GM Brett Veach assembled a new offensive line that very offseason. He signed guard Joe Thuney from the New England Patriots in free agency and later drafted center Creed Humphrey in the NFL draft. This solidified the offensive line, which was once a patchwork offensive line for the first 2 Super Bowl appearances, and this helped translate the Chiefs into a dynasty, winning back-to-back championships in Super Bowl 57 and Super Bowl 58. But in Super Bowl 59, the Chiefs had no answer for the Eagles' tenacious defense. There's no excuse like in Super Bowl 55, where the Chiefs were missing 2 offensive starters. Mahomes himself was injured. This time everybody was healthy, including Mahomes. Mahomes simply had no time in the pocket. Whenever he dropped back to pass, his receivers were barely 2 yards off the line of scrimmage, and there was a Eagles pass rusher in his face. This game was never close, as it was 24-0 at halftime, and the Chiefs trailed as many as 34-0 at the end of the third quarter. I'm just curious, what were the attempts at making any adjustments from Andy Reid and his staff? I mean, this is one of the greatest head coaches of this generation, especially after Bill Belichick is out of the NFL. It's Andy Reid's league and everybody else is just sitting around, but this is now the second time that he's had a game plan where he did not account for such a tenacious defensive line, and they just simply had no chance to get going. It just seemed like without the guys up front to protect Mahomes, the receivers did run some pretty good routes, but even they couldn't get separation on a consistent basis against this Eagles defensive backs. Now Mahomes drops to 3-2 in Super Bowls, and I think we can pause the GOAT debates compared to Tom Brady. And Tom Brady, who was on the call for Fox Sports, he was part of 3 Super Bowl losses in his historic career, but those 3 losses came by a combined 15 points. Every one of them was a 1-possession game. But Patrick Mahomes, when he loses a Super Bowl, he gets throttled, blown out. The 2 Super Bowl losses have been by a -40, and honestly could have been at least -50 if the Chiefs didn't pick up 2 garbage time touchdowns. This is by far the worst loss of Mahomes' career, and it just goes to show, without protection up front, any quarterback can look mortal in the NFL. So where do the Chiefs go from here? Well, obviously the first thing has to be addressed: offensive line. Offensive guard Trey Smith is likely to leave in free agency, as he's going to chase a bag this year. And this also probably opens the door for the Chiefs defense, where Chris Jones is getting older and they need to find another pass rusher outside of George Karlaftis. I think they just cannot depend on those 2 guys to get consistent pressure. I like George Karlaftis, he's a solid D end, but they absolutely need to find a complementary piece that can get consistent pressure. In the secondary, last year they had L'Jarius Sneed paired with Trent McDuffie, and that was a very lethal duo. But Jalen Watson replacing L'Jarius Sneed, who left via trade for a contract extension with the Tennessee Titans, has not lived up to that kind of level where L'Jarius Sneed played for Kansas City. Trent McDuffie can only do so much, and you simply cannot clone an all-pro cornerback. So as long as McDuffie is there, I'm sure he has that side of the field, or wherever his guy is that he's matched up on clamps. But for the most part, that other side opposite of McDuffie is going to be a weak spot in the Chiefs defense. I don't think the Chiefs lost this game due to their defense. I think they did a great job in limiting the offensive player of the year in Saquon Barkley, as he barely had any impact in this game. But the passing defense got lit up on a consistent basis. The running game was non-existent. If you look at the running backs, they combined for 24 yards, and it's just under 3 yards a carry, where Mahomes was the leading rusher yet again in the Super Bowl with 4 carries for 25 yards. Kareem Hunt is a solid back, but he's definitely past his prime, and Isaiah Pacheco, who was missing a great part of this year, hasn't been able to string together a consistent part in the Chiefs backfield to the point where the Chiefs don't feel like they can have a bell cow back to take some pressure off of Mahomes. Obviously, the offensive line plays a part in this as well, as they could not provide any type of rushing lanes for these Chiefs running backs, but they'll need to find somebody to help run the rock for the Chiefs. The receiving room is pretty simple. I know that Rashee Rice will be back next season, but the experiment with DeAndre Hopkins and Marquise Brown were not so successful, as Marquise Brown missed a greater part of the season due to an injury, and DeAndre Hopkins simply didn't work out. I mean, that drop he had on that pivotal 3rd and 11 where he had a ton of green grass, and I know Mahomes didn't necessarily put it in the most perfect spot. DeAndre Hopkins has been in this league long enough to say that if it's in your catch radius, it's a catchable ball, and he somehow slipped on the play and just never seemed to get going until it was way too late. Obviously, Xavier Worthy is the saving grace, as he had a magnificent performance in garbage time, but still put up a gaudy 8 catches for 157 yards and 2 touchdowns. He can get by anybody on the outside, and I think he could be the Chiefs' next version of Tyreek Hill if they continue to develop his trajectory, but they still have a lot of work to do, because another thing they have to consider is, what is Travis Kelce going to do in his future? He's been mulling retirement and did not look the greatest this year, with the exception of a handful of games where he looked like the old Travis Kelce. But with his focus being more about the podcasting space and also with his girlfriend Taylor Swift, well, I don't know where his priorities may lie, and I think at this point you got to think about a world without Travis Kelce for the Kansas City Chiefs. And then if you look at the entire AFC landscape, let's just start off with the division. The LA Chargers have finally found their head coach in Jim Harbaugh, and they have a young quarterback in Justin Herbert. The Denver Broncos have Sean Payton, and they seem to have their quarterback of the future in Bo Nix. Those are 2 viable threats who both made the postseason this year, are only going to get better, and I think they absolutely have a shot to take a bite into the Chiefs' armor next season. In the AFC as a whole, I mean, you still have Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, who are bound to finally break through this Chiefs blockade at some point, right? I mean, they're knocking on the door, and there's only so many times that they're going to get the door slammed in their face. And Joe Burrow, who does have that playoff win against Patrick Mahomes, doesn't seem to be scared, is going to have a retooled defense, and as long as the front office provides him with the surrounding cast and locks up T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, I think they have a lethal offense that can contend with the Chiefs as well. Another thing to remember is Mahomes will be 30 by the start of the 2025 season, and Andy Reid will be entering the back end of his 60s. So time is absolutely limited for these Chiefs. I mean, I'm not saying the dynasty is over, but there is potential, but they definitely won't have a grip hold of this conference like they used to have for the last 7 years. And I think this blueprint that the Eagles have laid out, where many teams now, I think in free agency and the upcoming draft, are going to focus on the defense, because if you can get pressure on Mahomes and also not take players away from this roster, I think this might be a case where the Chiefs have to make some adjustments on their roster, on the coaching staff, if they want to extend their dynasty.